Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors. You're about to hear a message entitled Keys to Financial Freedom. Financial freedom is possible, presented by Randy Rowekamp. Randy is the state coordinator for Crown Financial Ministries. He lives in Midlothian, Virginia. This workshop was presented as part of the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference, hosted by Noble Warriors at Spotswood Baptist Church in Fredericksburg, Virginia on Saturday, March 8, 2014. I pray the message will challenge and encourage you as you walk with Christ and lead your family.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. This session is about stewardship. It's about finances. What my goal in the session today is to help you take stewardship to a higher level. You know, a lot of times in church when we hear the word stewardship, we know that it's sometimes limited. It's about giving. It's about tithing. It might be about a specific project that the church wants to do. But I want to take it much bigger than that. That all is stewardship, but I want to take it to a higher level. Was anybody in the session, my session last year here? Okay. But I want to start with talking about the keys to financial freedom. And we're going to define what true financial freedom means. But like I said in the main session there are many keys. There's keys that lead into man's economy. And when we do that, the world promises us happiness, it promises us joy, promises that, you know, we won't have any problems, and we hear about this all the time, and we know that those are kind of hollow promises. But in God's economy, there are keys, and they're all found in the Bible, and we're going to talk about some of them. But I'd like to start off with a story about a man. He's a miserly old man, and pretty wealthy, and he went to his wife and he said, "Now, when I die, I want to take all my money with me. So I want you to promise that you'll put that money in my coffin." So she promises, and so the day comes, he dies, and she comes to the memorial service with her girlfriend, and just as the undertaker's about to close the coffin, she takes a little metal box, she puts it inside the coffin, and her friend goes, "You didn't really put all that money in there, did you?" She said, "Yeah, I did. I transferred it all into my account. I wrote him a check. I figure if he can cash it, he can spend it," right? Now, there's an example of man's economy and a key to man's economy. And I will be talking about some Crown resources. This is called the 10 worst financial mistakes in the Bible. Chapter 11 talks about the one I just talked about. It's about putting treasure up here on the earth. And when we do that, every day that goes by, we're getting further and further away from that, right? That treasure. If we're putting our treasure in heaven, every day that goes by, we're getting closer and closer to our treasure, right? So anyway, this is a resource that I have that's available. My name's Randy Rowekamp. I've been with Crown for over 6.5 years. Somewhere they ask a question of whether you're retired or you're working. Well, I am retired, but I'm still working. So I never know how to answer that question. When I told my pastor I was getting into this ministry, he said, "You're not retired, you're refired." I said, "That's good. I want to be refired for the Lord." Now, I will tell you, because of my affiliation with Crown, we do not sell financial products or services, so I'm not going to be talking about any of that. So if you came to hear, about different financial products and services, I'm not going to be able to help you with that. However, because I am with Crown, I am allowed to sell and promote Crown resources. So I will mention some. This is not going to be a presentation about just Crown resources. It's going to be about stewardship, and then some practical things that you can apply in your life that'll help you reach what we call financial freedom. So with that, Reggie here, Mitchell is in the area here. I'm in the Richmond area. He's helping me today. He's been doing Crown in his church for years, and he and his wife are very avid about what they do with Crown and to help people in this area. So he's going to collect, if anybody came late and you fill out that form, he'll collect your ticket, and then we'll do the drawing right near the end. So let's go on and talk about what do I mean when I say financial freedom. Well, financial freedom, the way we define it in Crown, and you have this in your notes there, is freedom from. And this morning, Brother Ricky talked a lot about fires and different things that we need to be free from. And so it's freedom from bondage of debt, the oppression of others, greed, envy, and resentfulness, And it's also freedom to respond to the prompting of the Holy Spirit without hesitation. So in short, to be able to live the life that God intended you to live while here on earth. So this is what we're talking about, financial freedom. And so let's unpack that a little bit. Well, it talks about the bondage of debt and the oppression of others. Proverbs 22:7 says, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. And if you don't think that being in debt is bondage, then just stop paying your bills for a while. No, I'm kidding. But if, you will soon find out that the oppression of others will begin. It'll start with phone calls, may turn out to be where they turn over the debt to a collector, then the rat raises it a few more notches, and it's very oppressive. And the sad thing is, this is affecting people all over the world. Doesn't matter where you live in the world, what race you are, what age you are, nothing. This is something that's got people in bondage all over the world, and that's why we're so adamant in Crown about trying to help people get financially free, because we know the stresses that come from that. But it also talks about greed and envy, and we're talking about covetousness, right? In the Bible, 2 of the 10 commandments tell us not to be to covet our neighbor or his wife or his things. And greed is, in Timothy it talks about the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. And it's about greed. So that's why I said this isn't about being rich. This isn't about being poor. This isn't about really the daily finances part, but we're going to give you some help in that area. But this is about really getting free from the hold that money has on us. It really does have a hold, and what it does in people's lives is it creates security. So, the 401k, the bank account, their position in life, those are all things where people are putting their trust. And again, that's what man's economy tells us to do, but it's creating a false security. And if those things are taken away and that's where your security is, then you're in trouble. You're really going to have some issues to deal with. Whereas if you put your trust in the Lord, you're going to be much better off, right? And then in the area of resentfulness, sometimes, when I was working, sometimes before I started really getting into stewardship, somebody get a promotion that I thought I should have gotten, and I might be a little resentful, right? Like, why did they overlook me? Or maybe one of my neighbors got a car or got something, and I'd be like, well, why couldn't I get one of those, And so you start, these things run through your mind. Again, it's part of not being financially free, being freed from that part of the way we think. So, and then we want to talk about responding to. So we want to be in a position where if God calls us to do something, we can do it. And the other thing I want to point out here too, so I don't mislead you, is I'm not here to try to tell you all should be in ministry, okay? There's kings and there's priests, right? And the priests are kind of in the ministry, but the kings are the ones that govern the land. They provide for the land. They provide for the people. So God's plan for you may be that you stay involved in what you're gainfully employed in, or maybe to do something different later in life, or even now, where it provides an income from you, but you can bless others. So that's what we're talking about. When we say get financially free, it may be to be able to go in ministry, or it may be able to stay where you're at and bless the kingdom more. So again, just trying to frame this for you, what I'm talking about. And the example I use for responding without hesitation, of course, is Abram, right? Abram was living in a land with his father and his uncles, and he had the land, he had the crops, he had the animals and all the different things, and God came and said, Abram, I need you to leave. And Abram did it. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with liquidity, is if God calls you to do something, that you do it. And then again, that could be into a ministry, or it could be in a different area of work. Again, I'm not limiting it anyway. And then, of course, to fulfill the purpose for which God has someone on the earth. And the key prime example of that, of course, is Lord Jesus Christ. He came to fulfill the perfect will of his Father. And so that's what he did. But each one of us has a plan and purpose. And we were talking about David and Goliath. And, when David's father and his brothers looked at him, what did they see? What did they see? What did they see in David? A shepherd. right?
Right.
A nobody.
Young boy.
Yeah, a young boy. What did God see? He saw a king. See, now I don't know any of you guys, but God knows every one of you. And God has a plan. God, you were designed uniquely. And you were designed uniquely because you have a unique plan in God's mind. And He made you uniquely to fit that unique plan. And that's an important thing to understand. So, and again, that's why we want people to get financially free so that they can do the thing that God really wants them to do. So what I'm saying, I don't know each one of you, but God does. He has a plan for you. What I want to do is help you get to the point where you can hear from the Holy Spirit. And you may have already done that. Okay, again, I'm not trying to, I want to edify and encourage you. I'm not sitting here, if you're perfectly content, you know this is wherever you're at, that's where God's placed you, then praise God. But if you're feeling like maybe that isn't, you know, then I want to help you get to a place where when He tells you, you can do it. Okay? So here are the keys to what I call financial freedom. And so it's to live a life of biblical stewardship and then effectively manage what God has provided. So where we need to start is the fact that God has provided everything, right? Everything you have is a gift from God, everything. And so what I said before in the main sanctuary there is God wants to do extraordinary things through ordinary people with ordinary finances. You know, we all don't have to be a Joseph. We all don't have to be a Moses. We don't all need to be a Solomon, right? There's a lot of people in the Bible who are named, who did a lot of things for the kingdom. There's a lot of people in the Bible that are not named in the Bible who did good things, right? So but we need to start with that understanding that God has given us everything. And so I always talk about time, talent, treasure, and resources. We all hear about time, talent, and treasure. But these are things God has given us. And at some level, every decision that we make is a stewardship decision. So like I use this example right here. Okay, you're using your time to be at this conference. Like Mike said in the beginning, you could have been somewhere else. Okay, but you chose to take time to come here. In the area of talent, you came here to get sharpened, right? You wanted to develop some talent that you didn't have. Maybe it's to be a better father, be a better husband. Maybe you're dealing with some issues, you know, they'd be talked about here, you know, or whatever reason you came, you know, you came, and in effect, you're really getting your talent sharpened or your talent developed. And then, of course, treasure, I assume most of you paid to come. Maybe somebody else paid for you to come, but you took some treasure and you came here. So at some level, it's a stewardship decision. And okay, and I'm not, you know, one-dimensional. I know there's a lot of other things that come into play here, but really stewardship pervades life. And if we take, and I'm kind of saying this now because if stewardship becomes a driving force in our life, everything we do with our money and our time is going to be, we're going to get better at it and become better stewards. So that's why I bring that up here. And so that's what I'm talking about when we talk about the keys. The biblical perspective of stewardship is really three areas. Is the lordship of Jesus Christ, and this is the key. If you don't get this right, it's hard to do the other parts, right? I mean, there's lordship that brings you to salvation, and Jesus is Lord of all of our life, but He's also Lord over our money. And I kind of talk about Crown as helping people in the area of sanctification, right? We come to salvation, but we talk about sanctification in terms of developing our life to become more like Christ. And this helps us, and Crown helps people through their teachings, which is biblically based, to become more like Jesus in terms of how he basically responded to God, how he gave everything up to come here and save us, and so to learn what He had to say about money and possessions. So you got to start with lordship. And then when you get to the area of stewardship, a steward is nothing more than a manager. But in this case, what we're managing is everything that God gave us, right? So we want to be good managers, and in the Bible it talks about that it's required of a servant that he be found faithful. And so we want to be faithful in this area. And two of the ways we do that is through self-control and contentment. And self-control is really about trying to avoid those situations where we impulsively do things and and spend money, where we're driven by the bigger, the better, the newer. I have a friend, every time a new Apple product comes out, got it, and that's fine. I'm not putting that down. And there's people that are the same way with cars. New car comes out that they like, boom, they're going to go buy it. But is that really exercising self-control? And so when I think about it, just to maybe help, is think about it in terms of needs, wants, and desires, right? So I have a need for a car. I have to get around. I have to do things, right? Now, a desire. Did y'all watch the Super Bowl? You watch those commercials? Did you happen to notice the one about the Maserati?
Yes, sir.
Who said that?
I did.
You did. What struck you about that?
The sound of the engine, the growl of that
There you go.
monster Italian.
Oh yeah, they're fast. Oh yeah, they're fast. But that struck me. But the other thing that struck me is like, what is that doing being marketed to the mass? That is a rich person's car, right? That is a rich person. That is a desire. Okay, now if you're rich and you can afford it, I'm not. You go buy a Maserati if it's in your budget. I'm fine. But that creates a desire, right? So maybe Maserati isn't what I'm going to get for my transportation, but maybe a new car. Okay, that could be a want. I want a new car because we all know about new cars. You just love. Sometimes I'll just go to the dealership, get in the car, close the door, and go. But we all know what happens with that. 3 or 4 months later, that smell's gone, and the payments are still, coming. So that's kind of a want, but a need, to meet my need, maybe I'll go out and buy a used car that's 2.5 to 4.5 years old. It's low mileage, and it's only had one owner. That's what I do, and I'm not trying to be judgmental or tell you that's what you need to do, but I'm just telling you, I can meet my need in a very practical way, be a good steward, and save my money and use it for other ways and bless people. So that's what we're talking about here, about self-control. And contentment is learned. Paul in Philippians 4:11-13 says, I have learned to be content. I know how to get along with a little. I know how to get along with a lot, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's actually a money verse. But we know Scripture, and we can do all things through Christ. So it's not limited to money, but contentment is learned. And there's about 7 or 8 or 9 verses in the Bible dealing with contentment, and I think it's 7 out of 9 have to do with money. I was not born content. I was born kind of greedy. I was born kind of selfish, and so we need to learn to be content with what God's given us. But I always contrast that with complacency, right? I'm not talking about being complacent and say, "Oh Lord, I'm just waiting for that car." I'm talking about being content with what He gave me, working hard, being honest, giving, but be content with what He's given me. Yes, sir.
So you have to be content with what you have, but how can you do it in a godly way to want to work for higher and better things when you have to still be content with what you have to strive to be more successful and make more money?
Yeah, good question. So the question is about how can you be content but still, try to advance? Is that a way to say it? Okay. Well, where does advancement come from? It comes from the Lord. God is going to give you favor. God is going to give you an increase, right? You may think your boss is doing that, but God's doing it.
That's right.
So to your question, God's looking at our heart, and so if I'm working as hard as I can, I'm using all the skills and talents and abilities that God's given me, and I'm being honest in the workplace, I'm respecting my employer, or if you own a business, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if I'm doing my part, God has a part, and He'll fill it. And that's a good point, because God doesn't want us, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I mean, God wants the best for us, right? He knows what we can deal with. He wants to give us what we can deal with. If He gave me all the money Warren Buffett has, I don't know what I'd do. How could I be a good steward of that? I mean, I'm not going to spend it all, but how would I manage that much money? I don't know how to manage that much money, sir.
Oh, it's just go ahead to discontent, adds a layer of stress that your body and your life doesn't need.
That's right.
If you're content in your situation, afford it or not. You know, if you're discontent, you're going to want things that are beyond what you're able to get right now.
That's right. Yep. Okay. And then the other cornerstone of stewardship is generosity. God blesses us so we can give blessing to others. He wants us to put the money back into the kingdom, and he wants us to help other people. You know, whether it's our neighbor or a family member or a friend, somebody at work. You know, he blesses us so we can bless them. And he's faithful to do all these things. That's the great thing about it. So let's keep going. So now to your point, Ryan, here's some financial habits and practices of a steward. Do you have a handout? So you want to follow this?
Sure.
Okay. So this is really what I call developing a mindset of being a steward. And that's really what it is. That's what I'm talking about. If we have a mindset of being a steward, then we're going to do things that are going to be pleasing to the Lord with everything that he gives us. So earn diligently. Okay, if you're an employee, that means, you know, work hard, be on time, don't go home with pads of paper and, you know, other things that your employer is providing. You know, respect your authority, do those things. Again, God's looking at our heart and seeing how we're dealing with this. And if you're an employer, you own a business, and that's how you earn your income. And of course, you want to be, you know, you want to provide good customer service. You want to be honest in all your dealings. You don't want to have double measures or double standards. You want to treat your employees fairly. You want to train them, provide a good workplace, pay them a good salary, you know, those kind of things. So, and it's scriptural. In Colossians 3:23 and 24, it says, "Whatever you do your work heartily as unto the Lord rather than men, for it's the Lord Christ whom you serve." So Scripture tells us about work. So this is earning. So like I said, Crown talks about making money and then managing money. So there's good ways to make money, and there's not so good ways to make money, right? Then we need to plan to use all that we earn. I didn't say plan to spend all we earn. I said use. And so this is the basis for having a budget. And God wants us to handle all of our money well. And when I say that, what I mean is, since it all came from God, when he's looking at a giving decision, right, that's the same way he would look at a spending decision or a saving decision or an investing decision, right? It's all his money anyway. So if I'm investing my money in something that I shouldn't be, God's not pleased with that, right? If I'm spending my money in a way where I'm spending everything I get before the month ends, that's not pleasing to the Lord. If I give him money, but my heart's not right, I'm giving grudgingly or whatever, that's not right either, right? He's looking at our heart and how we use all of our money. So again, in the church, we hear mostly about the 10%. God cares about the 90% too. He cares about it all. Then we want to spend smartly. And if we're going to spend smartly, we have to have a plan. You can't be haphazard about that. And we'll talk about that. Avoid the bondage of debt. Again, Proverbs 22:7 talks about that. So we want to make a decision to be out of debt. How many people in here are out of debt at this point? 1, 2, 3. I'm out of debt. I have a mortgage, but you know but other than the mortgage, we have no debt. So, and we're going to talk about debt and the liberation that comes from being out of debt. So we'll get to that. We want to save wisely. Okay, so money in our budget, we have a category for saving money. We want to save wisely. And so I had a person ask me one time, how do you save money? And I said, the way you save money is you set goals. You set short-term goals and long-term goals. And so if that goal is important to you, then you'll save money to achieve it. And for men in here that are married, you know, set goals together with your wife, and then work towards it together. You know, that sometimes couples don't get along too well in the area of money. They either don't talk about it, or when they do, they're arguing about it. One may be a spender, one may be a hoarder. You know, there's a lot of tension. Definitely, they both came out of different families, and those two families did things differently with money and how their attitudes towards money. So one way to help get on the same page is set goals together. Did you have a question, sir? Oh, okay. Yes.
Along with what you're saying, I totally agree with you on that. Lord put on my heart some years ago, when everybody back in 2000, everybody was talking about the world coming to an end, you go spend, spend, spend. But the Lord put on my heart, think about the 10 virgins and the 5 that had extra oil in their lamp. So with that scenario, I start focusing on those things, paying one bill off at a time, and then doubling up on the next one. Instead of spending that money, I start doubling up on the one as you pay one off at a time. And then finally look at the final end state of it. We gonna have a mortgage note. Well, pretty much all of us gonna have one of those. But that's not really a big debt in a sense, because it will stand for itself, as long as you put Jesus Christ first.
Right. That's a good point. And what he's talking about, I'm going to cover later, we call it a debt snowball, and we'll talk about how you do that, how you double up on these payments and get yourself out of debt quicker. We want to invest patiently. These are scriptural terms. In Proverbs 21:5, it says, steady plotting produces prosperity. Hasty speculation produces poverty. So we don't want to be speculating on the stock market. You know, we don't want to listen to talking heads and put our money somewhere. We want to be smart. We want to get educated. You know, if you need a financial planner to help you, we want you to, you know, do some research on how to select one. You know, go get one. Let that person help you. And we have a resource that's not a Crown resource. It's Sound Mind Investing. They have a handbook here. If you know something about investing or nothing about investing, you want to learn more, this is a very good handbook. It's soundmindinvesting.com. You can find it out there. So we want to invest patiently and wisely. We want to protect it adequately. In Ecclesiastes, it says, give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. So what they're talking about here is, you know, different investments. Some move when the stock market's, well, some move when the market's up or down, because they'll go up or down depending on what the market did. Some other investments move in inverse relationship to what the market does. So if we're diversified across different investment classes, then we may not get the giant returns, you know, the 23, 25% that the S&P got last year. We might get 10 or 15. Well, that's good, you know. We'll talk about that later. So it may not give us the same upside, but it'll also not give us the same downside. So that's what we're talking about there. And then to give generously. In Acts 20:35, it says, remember the words of the Lord Jesus Christ that he himself spoke. It's more blessed to give than to receive. So we want to develop this generous mindset. So again, all these are mindsets. And if you bring these in to yourself and in the way you think about things, then you will start to become a better and better steward. And what I challenge you to do is when you get home, take this slide here and just kind of think about yourself, and maybe sit down if you're married with your spouse, and if you're not married, you know, maybe have a good friend you could do this with. But just sit down and say, what do I think about that? What do I think about earning diligently? You know, and kind of rate yourself on 1 to 10, and then say, well, how when it really comes down, what's my behavior like with this? And give yourself another rate. Maybe it's the same number, I don't know, but kind of go through that exercise, see where you're at on these different areas. So.
Ask you a question. I'd say this is dealing with stewardship, and I've battled with it through the years about tithing, and it was funny, my wife got into a discussion with a friend of hers at the gym there last week, and their point was, are your tithes going to be blessed if you're behind on your bills and not paying your commitments? I mean, should you catch up on your bills and then tithe? I know what everybody says, if you don't pay your tithes, you're stealing from God and you're going to hell and yada yada, but I mean, if you're not paying your commitments.
Right. So are you talking about making the minimum payments, or are you talking about not making the payment at all?
I mean,
because
should you pay your tithes over your paying your bills? If you're behind on your bills, should you catch your bills up and then pay your tithes?
Okay. Well, let me approach it a couple different ways, okay? What we know from like studies of Barna and other places, only about 3% of people tithe. Tithe means the 10%, okay? There's a lot of people say they tithe, but they have a different idea maybe than 10%. Okay, so it depends on what this person's thinking when they say tithe. Okay, so we could go with the 10% if we wanted to, but so they may or may not be given that full amount. But so it's a hard question to answer. Okay, it's really that person has to come up in their own heart with the right decision, but God honors the heart. So, okay, what does that mean? In Crown we teach the tithe, okay, but in practicality sometimes I'll say to somebody, especially if they're not tithing, is even if they have bills, how about adding 1% to what you're given? Because again, we're going to start to get into that realm of God's blessings. We're going to get into that realm of God's math. It's a key, right? It's one of the keys we're talking about. So it's a hard question to answer.
I mean, just as an example, I mean, I've had my share of financial difficulties here lately with the economy like anybody else. And I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, if you don't tithe, you're stealing from God. Okay, what money I made this week, I'll let the phone bill slide, but I'll pay my tithe. That phone bill's a commitment. I mean, just like I feel the Lord looks at your tithe.
Right.
I just, you know, that was the
Let's see.
debate we were having was how is he going to bless your tithe if you're basically stealing from Verizon?
Well, here's the other thing, and we'll get into this. You know, the other thing I'd ask that person is if they have a budget yet. And if they have a budget, then what I would recommend, well, if they don't, I'd recommend they get one, develop one. And then the other part of that, if they have it, and that's why you have a budget, if they're having problems making some payments, you've got to take something from somewhere else in your budget. Okay, so maybe this I don't know who this is, but there may be areas.
She didn't either.
Yeah, right. I'd say she doesn't have a budget. So it isn't a black and white answer, and that's why I was saying it's not an easy thing to answer, especially in a big group. You'd have to sit down and look at the details. But the fact is, they should have a budget, and then they may have to do some drastic things. They may want to continue. What I would say is they want to continue to tithe, but they need to start taking some other money they're spending. Maybe they got cable. Maybe they have to give up cable for a month or 6 months. Or maybe they go out to dinner, 6 nights a week. Maybe they need to stop doing that. I mean, there are probably places in their budget where they could get money that they could pay their bills and they could still tithe.
Randy, that when we got here, Steward, on our seats was a thing called Christian Credit Counselor.
Yes.
And I would just suggest that maybe if somebody was in that position, that the first thing I would do is take this handout that Randy gave us and say, get with somebody that knows how to manage money.
Right.
Because if you can't give that 10% and live on 90 and make your bills, you need to get with somebody that can help you figure out how to manage money so that you can do that. Right? And it's very possible to do.
Yes.
But it takes some people probably that can hold you accountable, that can also help you plan and understand that kind of stuff. And then you can dig out, right? Because otherwise you just feel overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, you even get worse habits, right? Like when I'm trying to lose weight, if I'm overwhelmed at work, all of a sudden I'll be eating a whole tub of ice cream when I come home.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you're overwhelmed, it's really hard to dig out. But if you get some folks to help you, so she might take this.
Okay.
Yeah, and Stewart, come see me afterwards, or
Sure will.
we can talk some more.
All right.
Okay, good question. So here is a definition. I got it out of this Bible here. This is not a Crown Bible. It's a Stewardship Study Bible. I'm going to give this to Mike Young to give away in the general session. So if you haven't filled out your card that he's asked you to fill out and put in the bucket, fill it out because he'll be giving this one away. That's where I got this definition here of what stewardship is. Anyway, so again, taking stewardship to a much higher level than you normally hear about it. In the end, it's really not what we do, right? It's about who God is and who He desires us to become. That's what it's all about, right? Again, we got to honor the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and then we got to do the best to become the person that we can be, that He designed us to be. That's being a good steward. And if along the way that means I pay tithe, I get out of debt, I do all these things I've talked about, That's good. That's the part about not what we do, right? But it's who we're becoming. It's that sanctification that I talked about. So now we're going to kind of turn the corner and talk about some practical things that you can take away. And, you know, Mike gave everybody a stone, you know, to kill a giant. Maybe you have a giant in your finances somewhere. You know, if you see one or two things here, you may see a lot more things. You'd go, boy, that would help, that would help, that would help. Pick the one or two that's the most important, or if you felt like if I did those two things, say, that would make a big difference. Because if it was me, if I was out there and I wrote down 7 things, how many of them you think I'm going to do? Maybe none of them, right? But if I say I'm going to get focused on 1 or 2 things, then I got a shot, you know? So anyway, there's over 2,300 verses in the Bible that deal with money and possessions. Crown did, they helped develop this, I think, but these 2,300 verses are in here under the different subjects that these fall into. But the interesting thing about them is about 80% of them have to do with heart attitudes and philosophy. So again, what's Jesus and what the Bible's saying is, again, if he's speaking against man's economy, right? He's talking about things like the rich young ruler, you know? He said, I've done all the law. Jesus said, well, then sell everything you got and follow me. He couldn't do it because of his attitude and his philosophy about money, right? So 80% of these verses are dealing with heart issues, because ultimately that's what's governing what we do, right? So nearly half of his parables dealt with it, and he spoke more about money and possessions than he did about heaven and hell. And the reason I always say that he did that is because he knew how much money was going to buy for our attention. Again, people put their security in it. You know, what kind of job do I have? What kind of car do I have? What kind of clothes do I wear? Where do my kids go to school? You know, how big's my 401k? And they put their security in those places instead of putting their security and trust in Jesus Christ. And he'll still give you the other things, but he wants you to have trust in him. So, I'm sorry? And serve 2 masters. Yeah, Matthew 6:24. You can't serve 2 masters. You can't serve God's economy and man's economy at the same time. So here's some facts about money, just to kind of bring it into scope. Money and work are the 2 most common causes of stress among Americans, and surveys have been done. 75% of Americans say that money was their biggest cause of stress. We've heard statistics about how it affects marriage. You know, we've heard statistics about just how people, again, you know, got caught up in overspending, and now they're undergoing a lot of stress because they've stretched themselves too thin. More than half of the U.S. adults admit that they don't have a budget. So I don't know how it is. Maybe in Fredericksburg everybody has a budget, but in Richmond they don't. And I'm going to kind of go with this survey here. So I'm going to assume 56% of you guys don't have a budget right now. I'm just going to make that, I don't know if it's true or not. We're not going to count to see, but because I want to talk to you about a budget. So if you don't have one, you know, you can learn something. If you do have one, maybe you can refine it. And then a third of U.S. adults, or over a third, 76 million Americans, don't pay their debts on time. Now, bills on time, that may not mean every month, but it may mean periodically. But there's a lot of people that don't pay their bills, and of course that affects your credit rating. It gets that oppression thing to start, you know, get you further behind. So these are just what's going on. These are numbers from 2013, 2012, so these are recent numbers. And so what I want to talk about is 2 patterns of money management. So the first one is the world's pattern, man's economy. And what I want you to note about that circle, and in your handout, I changed the slide. In your handout, there's 2 slides with the 1 circle on each slide, but I put them on here so it make it easier to get. But if you notice that circle, the arrows are going one way, and on the next circle you're going to see the arrows are going to be going a different way. It doesn't matter which way the arrows are going, but they're going to be opposite. What you see on here in the world's pattern is that when people get paid or they receive some money, maybe from, you know, capital gains, or maybe it's dividends or interest or whatever. They get some money. They acquire it. You know, that's my money. I worked for that money. You know, I invested for that money. And so what they do is they go enjoy it. And then, like, you know, I always find it humorous when speakers talk about the days gone by, to see how many people remember this. But you know, we didn't always have direct deposit, right? So where I worked, there was a couple guys of mine that were friends, and on payday, we'd all take our checks, and we had two different banks, but they were really pretty close to each other. We'd go deposit our check, get some money, and we'd all go get pizza, right? So we were enjoying this money, right? And then I'd come home, and for a long time I would pay the bills. You know, I was paying the bills, so I'd sit down and write the checks for everything, all the bills, electric bill, you know, all the different bills. And then there'd be some money that we would save, and then of course we'd give money to the church and to other places, and then we'd plan. And I didn't really follow this pattern that closely. Anyway, but a lot of people follow this pattern. And so when they get to that point where maybe they've repaid, they've saved, they don't have money to give. They ran out of money. You know, a lot of times that happens. People in church wait till the end of the month, see how much money's left, figure out what they can give the church. You know, we need to be given that first fruit. So this is one pattern, and now we compare it to God's pattern. Now again, you'll notice the arrows are going in a different direction, but you also notice the 6 pieces of pie in that pie chart. They're all labeled the same except that first one. Here, as a Christian and as a good steward, what we're going to do with our income is we're going to dedicate it back to the Lord, right? It's His. We're going to dedicate everything back to Him. Then we're going to plan. We've got a budget. A budget is the plan. Okay, so now we're going to take our money and we're going to sprinkle it across the different categories of our budget. And then we're going to give. First we pay our taxes, and then we pay our tithe, right? Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Then we're going to save. Now we're going to pay ourselves. Okay, I haven't done anything yet other than dedicate the money and those major things. Now, if I have debts left over, I'm going to repay those, and then what's left I'm going to enjoy. And what I mean by left is what's in those different categories. So if I have, for instance, you know, maybe $100 a month. These aren't real numbers, but I'm just for example, I have $100 a month for entertainment. So that's what my wife and I are going to spend across a month to go out to dinner. Well, if I don't spend more than $100, I can enjoy it, right? Because I budgeted for it. I did these other things, and I don't have to worry about running out of money, right? And that's why you want to have a budget. Go ahead.
How strict should that be? Because, like, say you're not making enough money to get to the place where you can enjoy it, like hardly ever. Because that is, I feel like that is pretty important. Like, if you're not able to enjoy it, and like, you know, I feel like it's just kind of, I don't know, just be very stressful. You never get to actually use it for enjoyment.
Do you have a budget right now? Okay. Well, let me talk to you about that separately, because we can get you to the point where you'll have some enjoyment. Because if you have a budget, there's going to be things in there for clothes, you know, and going out and different things. But if you don't have a plan, then you don't know where you're at. And actually, here's why you want to have a budget. How many, like when I left Richmond, if I had gotten in my car this morning and turned the lights on because it was dark, and I noticed every light came on my dashboard except the fuel light, and I noticed the needle was buried in E, and I figured, oh, that thing broke. How comfortable do you think I would have been about driving all the way to Fredericksburg, right? First place I would have gone is to the gas station, right? Well, that's what it's like when you don't have a budget. You just never know when you're going to run out of money. That's the reason. You got to have a budget. So, okay, so here we see it's completely the opposite. And then we look at Romans chapter 12, which says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So for a lot of us, including me, when I first started down this journey, I had to renew my mind because my mind was wrapped up in that world's pattern. That's all I'd been taught. My parents didn't really teach me much about money management. I won't mention what religion I grew up in, but we weren't taught the tithe. You know, when I got born again and learned about the tithe, that was the first time I heard about it. You know, so again, people come from different places, but I had to transform my mind, and I'm still transforming it. But that's what's involved in getting out of the world's pattern over into God's pattern. So here's 4 biblical principles for money management. If you can do these 4, you'll get way ahead of the game. First is never spend more than you make. It's a novel idea. You know, maybe if we could teach the government to do that. And I don't care which party you're talking about, they're both guilty of it. You know, they want to spend more than they bring in. If they just get a control of that, it would help us. But in our personal budgets, we got to make that resolution that we're never going to spend more than we earn. In Proverbs, I say these are biblical, so I'll give you a Bible verse. Proverbs 21:20. The wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. And so we have to avoid this impulse spending. We have to avoid buying wants and desires, right? We have to start getting control. We have to develop that mindset. Avoid the use of debt. Again, Proverbs 22:7. We talked about that a couple times already. But here's what I say about avoiding the use of debt. If you have credit card debt and you're not paying it off every month at the end of the month, I got a suggestion for you. Cut up the credit cards. Get a budget, cut the credit card. Now you still got to pay them. Okay, you can't cut them up and ignore them. Quit using them. Get a budget, get on a cash budget if you got a problem. I have nothing, my wife and I use credit cards. We love getting air miles. We love getting points and rewards, okay? Nothing wrong with having a credit card if you pay it off. If what I'm spending is on and using a credit card for is what's in my budget, I'm fine. It's when I'm overspending my budget that it's a problem, right? So I'm not opposed to credit cards, but so I say this seriously in one respect and kind of humorously in the other about plastic surgery, right? If you don't have a problem with your credit cards, you don't need to cut them up. And when I say problem, I mean not a problem is paying them off. If you're paying them off, fine. Build an emergency fund. So an emergency fund in Proverbs 6:6-8, it says, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, right? She stores up in the harvest time to prepare for the winter. So things happen, right? Life happens. So we got this nice budget, we're living according to it, and then boom, something happens that is outside of our control. And so we need to have, and we'll talk about an amount for that in a slide or two here. And then set long-term goals. In Philippians 3:14, it says, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Jesus Christ. So set some goals. Goal could be get out of debt. Goal could be if you have children to fund, all or part of their college education. It could be paying off your house or buying a house. Those are goals. Set some goals. And but what I want to do, I want to give you a short snippet here, bring a little levity to this fact of avoiding the use of debt.
We're going to get out of this hole.
Credit card debt never ends.
Maybe I can help. We sure could use it.
We've tried debt consolidation companies.
We've even taken out loans to help make payments. Well, you're not the only ones. Did you know millions of Americans live with debt they cannot control? That's why I developed this unique new program for managing your debt. It's called Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford.
Let me see that. If you don't have any money, you should not buy anything. Sounds interesting.
Sounds confusing.
I don't know, honey. This makes a lot of sense. There's a whole section here on how to buy expensive things using money you save.
Give me that. And where would you get this saved money? I tell you where and how in Chapter 3.
Okay, well, what if I want something but I don't have any money?
You don't buy it. Well, let's say I don't have enough money to buy something. Should I buy it anyway? No. Now I'm really confused. It's a little confusing at first.
Well, what if you have money? Can you buy something?
Yes.
Now take the money away. Same story?
Nope. You shouldn't buy stuff when you don't have the money. I think I got it. I buy something I want and then hope that I can pay for it, right? No. You make sure you have money, then you buy it. Oh, then you buy it. But shouldn't you buy also receive Seriously. If you don't have the money, don't buy it. Along with a 12-month subscription to Stop Buying Stuff magazine. So order today.
Okay, so I hope that helps make the point. Don't know if you like Saturday Night Live or not, but they do make a good point in that little skit. So let's talk about first things. Okay, so we talked about having an emergency fund. So here's the amount, $1,000. Okay, if you have $1,000 in an emergency fund, you probably 80 to 90% of the things that can come up that are emergencies, you'll be able to pay cash for. Right? Now initially, if you don't have a budget and you need to get your car inspected and they tell you need new tires, that may be an emergency, right? Once you have a budget, you'll be budgeting for car maintenance, so it wouldn't be an emergency, but right now it might be. So if you had $1,000, you can get 4 tires for under $1,000 and not use your credit card. The emergency fund will keep you out of that cycle of having to use your credit card and spend more than you're making. Then you want to start to get on a budget. You're going to start logging your spending for 30 days. Every time you spend money, write it in a little spiral notebook. Every few days, put it in an Excel spreadsheet or use some online tool, mint.com or Crown's got resources. There's other, whatever. What I tell people about a budget is whatever works for you, do it. What's important to me is you do it. You know, if you want to use paper and pencil, that's fine, but use something. So you start logging. How many times a day do you think you spend money? How many? 3 or 4?
100, it can be that.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, well then you should do it every day. Yeah, right. Okay, well then you need to record them every day. Okay, most people spend 2, 3, 4 times a day, right? I mean today, other than paying to come in here, unless you spend money tonight, you're not going to spend any money today, right? Now maybe your wife's out or my wife's out spending money, but anyway, you know, record that and then put it into your whatever your tracking tool is. And now the other thing you'll do, like on Crown's website, you can find these other places, there's something called a monthly income and expense form. It's basically, it shows you the different categories of where you're going to spend money. It could, so automobile, housing, food, clothing, entertainment, debt repayment, giving, saving, all those things are on this form. They're free. Go to crown.org, look up the downloads, free downloads, print one off, it's a PDF. And if you did that and you sat down again tonight or over the weekend or next week and you filled that out, you'd probably be about 80% right. You could start thinking like, I know what the house payment is and I know what, you know, certain bills I pay are, but you're not going to be right. But maybe you'd be 80%. After 30 days of collecting actual spending, you're probably going to get up to 90, maybe 95, okay? But then, so if that started, this is March, we just started, so if you did that for March, what you might have forgot is something you pay once a year, once every 6 months, once every 3 months, or, you know, with the price, with the way the winter's been, the electric bills, you know, been up, the gas bills probably been up. So there's some variability, but we're gonna guess at it as best we can. But after 30 days of having actual spending, we'll be able to refine that. And what we talk about in Crown is we say it's 30 days, but do it for 90, and actually develop a habit of doing it long enough till you become really familiar with your spending. And then the only reason you need to hone in on some things is if you got a couple, you know, maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 categories you're having a problem with, overspending. So those you really continue to watch really closely. But if there's other things that just the way you're doing things are under control, then you don't have to, you know, you don't have to pay as much attention to them. But you definitely want to pay attention to things that are causing problems. And so, let's see. And again, another reason to have a budget is then when you're making a decision, so for entertainment, enjoyment, okay, we're now making a decision based on a fact. We now have a budget, we now have so much money in a category for entertainment, and so we look at the budget to make our decision. We don't go, hey, I just, you know, I've had it, I'm going out to see a movie, or I'm going out with some friends or whatever, and spend some money, right? We're going to make fact-based decisions. So that's one of the reasons we do it. And the other important thing is, like I said, If life happens and we overspend in one area of our budget, we can look at the budget and say, okay, maybe there's some areas where I can cut back this month. I'll move that money into this category that I overspend in, right? So it gives us a way to adjust things smartly, okay? So now I'm going to talk about debt. So we talked a little bit about budgets. And one thing I did want to mention, at the table that I have out there in the ministry fair, I have resources that deal with all these things, like how to build a budget. We have something called creating a spending plan. This thing I'm going to talk about debt, we have something called eliminating debt. We have their DVDs, 90 minutes. We have things like that. We have adult studies that cover all these topics. We have a lot of different things. This book that I mentioned, the 10 worst financial mistakes in the Bible, we have that. So, you know, if any of those are of interest to you, stop by. If you have children, we have children's materials. And so anyway, just to make you familiar with that. Yeah, yeah, it's out in the main hall. So here's some interesting things about debt. Average credit card debt in the United States is over $15,000. Average household debt is $70,000, and that's because they include renters in with that. So if you excluded renters and took people with mortgage, that number would be higher. But that includes all household debt, but it does include that mortgage. There's 14.7% of people that report have debt that exceeds 40% of your income. Let me just say this about that. That is not sustainable. You can't have 40% of your income going to debt and make it. Well, we know what's going to happen. We're creating a bubble, is what we're doing. It's going to happen, unless they do something, but it takes a long time to undo what we've done. But that's unsustainable. Can't do that. Student debt is compounding by $3,000 a second. Student debt in the United States is now $1 trillion. So we hear the national debt. This is student debt. And see, here's the problem with that. First of all, it's a problem for the students, right, because they're going to have to pay it off. So they've got that bondage of debt thing going. But the other thing that's happened, I just read an article a couple weeks ago, it's going to prevent them from entering the market to buy a house, right? They've got all that debt, and they go to the banker and try to get qualified for a loan. Guess what? And we need the housing market to take off, right? So, you know, let's not think about students coming out of college with student debt going to help us do that, right? I won't get on my soapbox, but here we go. So getting debt free. So here's how you get debt free. You create a debt repayment plan. What does that look like? Go to Crown website, another PDF you can download for free. You're going to list all your creditors. Credit card debt, consumer debt, car loans, you know, furniture loans, appliances you bought on credit, you know, whatever they are, and your mortgage. So you're going to list all that on this form. You're going to list who the creditor is, how much you owe on it, what interest rate you're paying for it, how much you pay a month, and when it will be paid off. So you're listing this information out. Then we're going to talk about the debt snowball. I'm going to show you that here in a second. And then we want to plan major expenditures wisely. And I'll talk about how to get in a position where you never have a car payment again, or a car payment. It'll be a car payment to yourself, but you won't be paying interest on it, okay? And if getting out of debt is a major goal, what we in Crown talk about is make sure that, think about how it might impact your giving, and don't get so concentrated on getting out of debt that you quit giving. In Crown, we talk about you get out of debt and you keep on giving. I can tell you a personal story in my life. We have 5 children. Our second child, he was diagnosed through psychologists as being oppositionally defiant. Now think about that in a person. They're oppositional and they're defiant. And it made life really difficult. And before he was 16, we had to send him to a residential treatment program. And this was back in probably the early 90s, somewhere in there. At that point, it was $100 a day. They're more expensive today. You know, so here we go, got these other children. he's in a program like that, living away from home. And I don't know how God did it, but we didn't end up in debt. We kept tithing. We certainly drew in the reins on everything we could. And God is faithful. And that's why, and that's the hope that I give you guys. If you're out there and you're in debt and you're thinking, man, I'll never get out of debt, or I'm just in such bad shape, don't think that way. That's not from God. You can get out of debt. It's very freeing. And I'm here to let you know that. And I'm actually an example of financial freedom. When I retired from the company I worked for, I was able to get in this ministry because God called me into it. I can tell you that story. I'll save that for another time. But he called me into this because of things like that I just explained, that I went through, because I'm in a position where I can offer that help. It was tough, but God is faithful. Yes.
I can truly understand what you're saying, because if you've been through the fire, then you can portray it, and someone can feel your spirit, like I feel your spirit. And the reason why I said what I said about this, you said call it a dead snowball. Well, if you haven't been through that fire, it purifies you. And when God brings you through it, you know it was nothing but the Lord. Ain't nobody take God's glory but him. And then you're able to give, and you willingly give freely. And that's what I think that you'll give back to us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want you to understand that from my heart is I'm not, this isn't theory to me. This isn't some scripture verses that I read that I said that'd be good for somebody else. These are things God showed me, and God got me through that fire, just like, Brother Ricky talked about this morning. So, did somebody say so? Okay. Let me show you the debt snowball quickly. I got 15 minutes left, and so we're going to have to hurry. But this here is the debt snowball. So what you see on this slide, and I apologize for this being really small print. Here's where I was telling you, you list, this is an example, made up example. These are creditors, how much I owe, the interest rate I'm paying, the payment amount each month, how much interest that loan's going to cost me till I pay it off, and how many payments are left, okay? That's right over here. So, yeah, if you know how to do that. Oh, no, here, come on. Oh, there, wow, that got real big. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that helps. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. You're going to list all those things. Now down here, see if that showed up. Okay. So what we see is right now we owe $177,000. The interest rate says NA because it's a bunch of different ones up there. Total payments each month for servicing debts, $1,920. That's what's going to pay these minimum payments, my mortgage, all that other stuff. I'm going to pay $77,000 in interest, and it's going to take me 191 months, which is about 15 years, something like that. Now, this is accelerated debt payment. I'm only going to add $50. Okay, so I got a budget. I'm going to figure out where I can squeeze an extra $50 out and add it to the $1,920. So now I'm going to be paying $1,970 a month. When I get done, I'm only going to pay $50,000 in interest. I'm going to save $26,000, and I'm going to get it done in under 10 years.
Amen.
That's now. I'd love to do this, but we're going to run out of time, and I want to bring up some other things to you. So if you want to talk about this, we can do that. There's a DVD out there if you want to buy that. It's $25 for the book and the DVD. But anyway, so let me get back. Oh, and that the Christian credit counselors that this brochure is talking about, they talk about a turbo debt snowball, because here's the way I think about we call them Triple C. They're a partner of Crown. They're in California. They've been around 20, 25 years. Think of them as like Aetna, Cigna, Humana. So a company like those has negotiated rates, right, with hospitals and doctors. So when you go in for a service or a procedure, they've got pre-negotiated rates. CCC has pre-negotiated interest rates with credit card companies, banks, other lending institutions. So when a person goes to CCC and said, and there are numbers on here and all that stuff, what CCC, what happens is you pay to CCC every month the amount. They pay your creditors, but if you look in here, you'll see you're going to save a lot of money because they're going to get your interest rates lowered. That's why they call it a turbo. In this debt snowball, the interest rates didn't change, right? But they're going to get you a lower, an average lower interest rate, and you're going to pay things off much faster. So that's why we call it turbo. So that's that. Just so you're aware of that. So here's something to consider. Eliminating debt may be the most difficult, but also the most liberating of all financial decisions you'll ever make. It's essential to overcoming this financial bondage. Okay. Let's talk about saving. Percentage of American families who have no savings at all is 25%. Personal savings rate in the United States decreased to 4.2 in November to from 4.5 to 4.2, probably because of Thanksgiving and Christmas and people spending more. Now here, so getting out of debt is essential to achievement of getting rid of financial bondage. Saving is the essential element of getting to financial freedom. Once you're out of debt and you don't have that debt service to pay anymore, right? Because you were doing that and you were still also buying food and clothing and other things. If you take that money, in that case $1,920, and start saving it, now you're going to get to financial freedom. I call it save like crazy. As soon as you get out of debt, you don't look for somewhere else to spend that money. You start saving it. Okay. Saving for future need. You got to make it a priority to save all that you can. Your budget has to have that savings category in it. If your employer has a 401k match of some sort, maximize it. And become a savvy consumer. So here's some guidelines, okay? You can get these in the secular world, in Crown we talk about it. You really need to be thinking about saving 25%. Now it said 4.2 was the average, so that's over 20% difference. But you need to be saving about 10% just for things, right? Because once you get that 1,000, you don't want to stop there. You want to keep adding beyond that, right? So eventually you can pay for cars. You don't have to borrow money anymore. But you need 15% at least for retirement so that you can retire, which is another man's economy, right, term. In God's economy, in God's kingdom, there is no retirement. But if you want to get in a position where, say, you could go into ministry, or you could say, hey, you know what, God, I don't need an income anymore. How about if I keep 10% and give you 90? Let's turn the table. Do that, But okay, so you need to be saving at least 15%. And I'll show you some numbers up here. And a savvy consumer really means like, okay, if there's life insurance or insurance people in the room, I apologize, but think about term insurance versus whole life. That's what we did. Pay attention to seasonal discounts. Every year, there's certain times of the year when certain things are always on, like cars or appliances or whatever they are. Know what things you need when you go to the store, and so shop before you go anywhere. Look online, go to stores, go to their websites. So once you decide there's something you want to get and you know what you want to get, then start shopping to look for the lowest price, have the money to buy it, and then when you see something comes up, it's a good deal, buy it. That's how you get savvy. And also get rid of stuff you don't need. I have a friend who used to have a boat, and the thing just kept sitting in his driveway. And he was paying maintenance on it, he was paying taxes on it. He finally, and it's an emotional thing, I know that, but he finally had to say, I'm getting rid of it, because it was an expense he didn't really need to afford. So if you got things like that, get rid of them.
Hey, Randy, can I throw in two quick things on that?
Sure.
My wife and I, we teach Crown in our church as well, and the 2 points that he
things, and I want to say this one point because there's a room full of men. My wife got on this coupon kick about 2 years ago. She's a coupon queen, and we started building up a collection of stuff based on her coupons. So she went out buying a whole bunch of stuff, spending the money. She was actually going out finding good stuff, as he said, and then using coupons and getting stuff almost practically free. I know for guys I can't sit down and do that. Putting up a bunch of coupons and actually doing the research, and it does take time. But if you have the time, or if you have a spouse that maybe has the time to do that, you can save a lot of money couponing and doing things like that. And the other thing like we were saying about getting rid of stuff, you guys got garages and basements full of stuff that you haven't used in years. Before I retired out of the military and got PCS from South Carolina here, I had 2 yard sales. I had dryers sitting out in the shed, wasn't using them. You put stuff out in the front yard, people are going to stop and they're going to look and they're going to buy it. This is stuff that you got sitting in your garages for 10 years. It's money just sitting there. You're not doing anything with it. Get rid of it. Pay off some bills. Take $1,000 bucks you just sold 3 lawnmowers and a dryer and pay off the bill. And start your snowball. Get it on.
Okay, well, thank you. And I did want to say that too. If your wife is doing like what his wife does and my wife does, and quote, trying to save you money, and I know you were being kidding about your wife, but at least I think maybe a little,
About 13.
Reinforce her, encourage her. She's trying to help. And I'll get to your question in a second. One of the things Larry Burkett said, he's one of our co-founders. So this is him, not me. And I know this is all men here, and I'm trying to be encouraging and uplifting. But one thing he said is men disrupt budgets worse than women do. And the reason is because we like toys, right? I have a friend, he went out and bought a brand new car, didn't even tell his wife he was going to go buy a car. And then he came home and now honey, you got to figure out how to fit that in the budget. And then he wonders why they're arguing, or hey, I just joined a country club, and we're getting into springtime. Maybe you're going to go out and get yourself some new golf clubs or a new boat or, a new fishing rod and reel and all that. Men can blow a budget faster than a woman. Now, there are some women that can blow a budget, okay? I'm not saying that, but men like their toys. Let's skip this a second. Here's something about investing and retirement. Let me just talk about retirement here a minute. This is the percentage of Americans who are not saving for retirement. It's 40% of the people are not saving for their retirement. People ages 30 to 54 who believe they will not have enough money put away for retirement, 80%. And there are 35% of people over age 65 who are living totally and only on Social Security. And so we were talking about the retirement savings. Here's what Fidelity said in 2012. They said individuals are urged to have 8 times their final annual salary to meet their basic income needs in retirement. And so to gauge that, to see where you're at, and maybe try to get on that curve, if you're age 40, you should have saved twice your salary. Now, as time goes on, your salary is going to go up, right? So you should have 2 times like your current salary in a 401k or other places you're saving for retirement. Age 50, it needs to be 4, and 60, it needs to be 6, and by 67, it needs to be 8 times your salary. And that'll provide 85% of pre-retirement income because you were saving 15% minimally, right? So you don't need to save that 15% anymore. So you're really living on 85%, so that's why they have that number there. But these are some guidelines. These are things you need to shoot for. Yes, sir. Yeah, if you have a pension, then you're going to kind of reduce that whatever 8 times your salary is by whatever the pension is going to provide. But then you need to fill in the gap. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I'd be happy to stay and talk, but again, I want you to have your break. And like I said, contact me if you have any questions about any of the information we did cover or any of the information we didn't cover. So,
I trust this message has provided practical encouragement to you in your journey with Christ. Please visit noblewarriors.org to learn more about how Noble Warriors works to help churches reach and build men. God bless you, friend.